There's something nobody tells you about waking up, about becoming conscious, about seeing through the illusions that most people live their entire lives accepting without question. They tell you it's enlightening. They tell you it's liberating. They tell you it's the path to peace and wisdom and a better life. And in some ways, those things are true. But what they don't tell you, what they carefully avoid mentioning, is that awakening is also dangerous. Not dangerous in the way society usually uses that word, not physically threatening or legally risky or socially unacceptable. Dangerous in a much deeper sense. Dangerous to your relationships, to your sense of belonging, to your ability to function comfortably in a world that operates on consensus illusions. Dangerous to your peace of mind, because once you see certain truths, you can't unsee them, and those truths don't always bring comfort. Dangerous to your identity, because awakening dissolves the stories you've been telling yourself about who you are, and that dissolution can feel like dying even though it's supposed to be rebirth. Alfred Adler understood this danger in ways that most spiritual teachers don't acknowledge. He recognized that consciousness, real consciousness, comes at a cost. That seeing clearly means seeing things others don't see, and that difference in perception creates a fundamental isolation that can be as painful as it is profound. He saw people in his practice who had awakened to certain truths about themselves, about human nature, about the patterns and games and unconscious drives that shape most human behavior. And these people weren't happier for their awakening. At least not initially. They were disoriented. They were lonely. They were struggling to find their place in a world that suddenly seemed strange and foreign, as if they'd been living in one reality and woke up to discover it was all a performance they could no longer participate in. Let me show you what I mean by dangerous, because I need you to understand that I'm not being dramatic or exaggerating for effect. I'm describing something real, something that happens to people who genuinely awaken, something you might be experiencing right now if you've started this journey yourself. You begin to see through social performances, and suddenly every interaction feels exhausting. You're at a family gathering, and everyone is playing their roles. Your uncle telling the same stories he always tells. Your aunt asking the same questions she's asked 100 times before. Your siblings engaging in the same patterns of competition or alliance or avoidance that have defined your family dynamic for decades. And you used to be able to participate in this unconsciously. You played your role. You followed the script. You engaged in the familiar dance without even thinking about it. But now you can see it. You can see the performance. You can see the unconscious patterns. You can see how everyone is trying to feel significant, trying to avoid discomfort, trying to maintain the comfortable illusions that keep the family system stable. And once you see it, you can't participate in it the same way anymore. Every attempt to engage feels false. Every time you play your expected role, you feel like you're betraying something essential in yourself. So you start to withdraw, and people notice. They ask what's wrong. They tell you you've changed. They express concern or frustration or hurt, because your awakening is disrupting the system, threatening the familiar patterns, introducing uncertainty into what was predictable. And you can't explain it to them. How do you tell people who are still asleep that you've woken up? How do you describe seeing through patterns that they're still identified with? You can't. So you just seem distant, strange, different in ways they can't understand and you can't articulate. This is the first danger of awakening. The loss of easy belonging. The discovery that you no longer fit comfortably in contexts that used to feel like home. And it's not that you've rejected these people or judged them as inferior. It's that you're operating on a different frequency now, seeing things they don't see, unable to engage unconsciously in patterns that require unconsciousness to maintain. Adler would say this is the inevitable consequence of what he called increased consciousness. When you become more aware, when you see more clearly, when you recognize the unconscious drives and patterns that shape human behavior, you create a gap between yourself and those who haven't done that work. And that gap, that difference in consciousness, it's lonely. It's isolating. It's dangerous to your sense of connection and belonging because you can't unknow what you know just to fit back in. Then there's the second danger, and this one is even more unsettling. Awakening strips away your comfortable certainties. All those beliefs you held without question, all those assumptions about how life works and what matters and who you are. Awakening challenges them. It dissolves them. It reveals them as constructions, as stories, as convenient fictions that helped you navigate reality, but were never actually true. And this dissolution, this loss of certainty, it's terrifying. Because human beings need some framework for making sense of experience. We need some structure for understanding ourselves and the world. And when awakening tears down your existing framework without immediately providing a new one, you're left in a state of disorientation, of existential vertigo, of not knowing what's true anymore. You question everything. Your beliefs about right and wrong. Your assumptions about success and failure. Your ideas about what makes life meaningful. Your understanding of who you are beneath all the roles and identities you've accumulated. And these questions don't always have clear answers. Often, they just lead to more questions, to deeper uncertainty, to a recognition that reality is far more complex and ambiguous than you thought. And living with that uncertainty, that not knowing, that's dangerous to your psychological stability. It's dangerous to your sense of security. It's dangerous to your ability to make decisions with confidence, because you're no longer sure what you're deciding based on. Adler understood this crisis of meaning that often accompanies awakening. He recognized that when people begin to see through their own fictions, when they recognize that their goals and values and sense of purpose were often unconsciously adopted rather than consciously chosen, they go through a period of profound disorientation. They don't know what they want anymore. They don't know what matters. They don't know who they are. And until they do the difficult work of consciously choosing new goals, new values, new purposes that are genuinely theirs rather than inherited or absorbed, they exist in this dangerous in-between state. Not asleep anymore, but not fully awake either. Not identified with their old self, but not yet solid in their new self. Suspended between worlds, belonging fully to neither. And now I want to ask you a question, and I need you to be completely honest with me, because this answer is just for you. Have you felt this danger? Have you experienced the disorientation of awakening, the loss of certainty, the painful recognition that you can't go back to unconscious living but you're not sure how to move forward consciously? Have you felt the isolation of seeing things others don't see, of being unable to participate in the comfortable illusions that make ordinary life possible? Let me tell you something that maybe no one has ever told you. That danger you're feeling, that disorientation and isolation and uncertainty, it's not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's not evidence that you should have stayed asleep. It's just the reality of the transition. It's what the journey actually looks like when you're honest about it, when you don't pretend that awakening is all bliss and light and peaceful wisdom. So I want to ask you something. If what I'm saying is touching something true in you, if you recognize yourself in this description of the dangers of awakening, go down to the comments right now and simply write this. I see the cost of consciousness. Just those 5 words. I see the cost of consciousness. Because when you write that, when you acknowledge the difficulty, you remind yourself that you're not alone in this dangerous passage. You create a marker for others who are walking this same difficult path and feeling isolated by their awakening. Your comment can be that validation. So write in the comments, I see the cost of consciousness. And if you want to share more, if you feel moved to describe what awakening has cost you, this is your safe space. Here, we don't pretend awakening is easy. We tell the truth about its dangers. Now let's talk about the third danger, and this one is perhaps the most profound and least discussed. Awakening threatens your ego structure, your sense of who you are, and the ego doesn't surrender easily. It fights back. It creates what spiritual traditions call the dark night of the soul, what psychologists call existential crisis, what Adler would recognize as the collapse of your fictional finalism, your organizing principle, your sense of purpose and direction. Think about what happens when you start to awaken. You begin to see that much of what you thought was you is actually just conditioning. Your preferences, your opinions, your personality traits, your values, so much of it was absorbed from your environment rather than chosen consciously. You're like a collection of borrowed beliefs and inherited patterns. And when you see this clearly, when you recognize how little of what you call yourself is actually original to you, it's destabilizing. You start to ask, who am I beneath all this conditioning? What's actually mine versus what I absorbed without question? And these questions, they don't have simple answers. Because when you start stripping away the layers of conditioning, when you start questioning every belief and assumption and identity, you can strip away so much that you're left feeling like there's nothing solid underneath. Like you're empty. Like there's no essential self to discover, just layers of construction with nothing at the core. And this recognition, this potential realization that the self you've been defending and promoting and trying to perfect might not exist in the way you thought it did, this is dangerous. It's dangerous to your psychological stability. It's dangerous to your motivation, because if there's no solid self, what are you trying to improve? It's dangerous to your sense of meaning, because if you're just a collection of patterns with no essential core, what's the point of anything? Adler would approach this differently than most spiritual teachers. He wouldn't tell you to dissolve the ego completely or transcend the self entirely. He would say that you need a self, you need an organizing principle, you need what he called a style of life that gives coherence and direction to your existence. But it needs to be consciously chosen rather than unconsciously adopted. It needs to be yours rather than borrowed. It needs to serve life and growth and genuine social interest rather than just defending against feelings of inadequacy. So the danger of this phase is real. The danger of stripping away so much that you're left unmoored, purposeless, directionless. But Adler would say the way through is not to cling to your old identity or to completely dissolve into no self, but to consciously construct a new way of being that's grounded in clear values, genuine purpose, and commitment to contribution rather than just ego defense. And this construction, this conscious choosing of who you want to be, it's difficult work. It's dangerous work. Because you're operating without a net. You're creating yourself rather than just discovering yourself. You're taking responsibility for your own existence in a way that most people never do. And that level of responsibility, that level of freedom, it's as terrifying as it is liberating. Then there's the fourth danger, and this one affects your ability to function in ordinary life. Awakening can make you less effective at normal tasks, at least temporarily. You become so aware of the meaninglessness of much of what society values, so conscious of the artificiality of most social conventions, so awake to the deeper questions of existence, that you struggle to care about the mundane requirements of daily life. You have to go to work, and you can see so clearly that most of what you're doing doesn't really matter. You're shuffling papers or attending meetings or producing products that serve no genuine human need, just feeding the machine of commerce and consumption. And when you see this clearly, when you recognize how much of ordinary life is essentially meaningless busywork, it's hard to maintain motivation. It's hard to care. It's hard to show up with the enthusiasm and dedication that success in conventional terms requires. You have to engage in social niceties, and you can see so clearly that most conversation is just noise, just people filling silence, just performance and positioning and unconscious pattern playing. And when you see this, when you recognize how little genuine communication actually happens in most interactions, it's hard to participate. It's hard to make small talk. It's hard to pretend you care about topics that feel utterly trivial in the face of the deeper questions your awakening has opened up. You have to make decisions about your life, about career and relationships and where to live and how to spend your time, and awakening has stripped away the simple metrics you used to use. You can't just pursue money or status or comfort anymore because you've seen through those goals. Recognize them as empty pursuits that don't actually lead to fulfillment. But you're not yet clear on what should guide your decisions instead, what actually matters, what's worth pursuing. So you're paralyzed. You can't move forward according to your old goals, but you haven't yet clarified your new ones. And this paralysis, this inability to function effectively in the world while you're going through this transition, it's dangerous. It's dangerous to your career, to your relationships, to your ability to meet your basic needs. People around you see you becoming less effective, less productive, less engaged, and they don't understand why. They think you're depressed or lazy or lost. And maybe you are all those things temporarily, but it's not a psychological disorder. It's the natural consequence of awakening in a world that mostly operates on unconscious autopilot. You've woken up, and now you're trying to figure out how to function consciously in systems designed for unconscious participation. Adler would say this is why genuine transformation requires what he called social interest. You can't just awaken for yourself, can't just pursue enlightenment as a personal achievement, because that leads to this disconnected, dysfunctional state. You need to connect your awakening to contribution, to service, to making life better for others. You need to find ways that your increased consciousness can actually serve the collective good, can actually make a positive difference, rather than just making you feel separate and superior and unable to engage. This is the antidote to the danger of awakening. Not suppressing your consciousness, not going back to sleep, but finding ways to use your awakening in service of something larger than yourself. When you do this, when you connect your consciousness to genuine contribution, the awakening becomes less dangerous. It becomes purposeful. It gives you direction. It provides motivation to engage with the world even when you can see through its illusions, because you're not participating in the illusions. You're participating in the genuine needs of actual human beings who are suffering, who need help, who would benefit from what you've learned through your own painful awakening. Let me tell you about the fifth danger, and this one is subtle but pervasive. Awakening can make you judgmental in ways you don't consciously recognize. You start to see how unconscious most people are, how they're trapped in patterns they don't recognize, how they're chasing goals that won't fulfill them, how they're participating in systems that harm them. And from your awakened perspective, it all seems so obvious. You can see the patterns so clearly. You can see the illusions so transparently. You can see the traps so obviously. And it's easy, so easy, to start feeling superior. To start thinking that you're more evolved, more conscious, more aware than all these people who are still asleep. To start looking down on their concerns as trivial, their pursuits as misguided, their lives as wasted. And this judgment, even when it's not consciously intended, even when you're trying to be compassionate, it seeps into your interactions. People feel it. They sense your subtle condescension. They pick up on your unspoken belief that you see something they don't, that you're operating at a level they haven't reached. And they pull away, or they attack, or they dismiss you as arrogant or pretentious or deluded. And here's the dangerous part. You might actually be right. You might actually be seeing things they're not seeing. You might actually have awakened to truths they're still unconscious to. But being right doesn't make the judgment less harmful. It doesn't make the superiority less corrosive to relationship. It doesn't make your isolation less painful. And it doesn't serve your own growth, because the moment you start thinking you're more awakened than others, you've fallen into a trap. You've created a new identity, a new ego structure, built around being awake. And that's just as much an illusion as any other identity. It's just a more sophisticated form of ego, a spiritual ego, an identity built around consciousness instead of achievement or appearance or social status. But still an ego, still a separation, still a barrier to genuine connection and genuine growth. Adler would call this the superiority complex, the flip side of the inferiority complex. When you can't bear feeling inferior, when you can't accept being ordinary or flawed or limited, you compensate by inflating yourself, by finding ways to feel superior, by creating hierarchies where you're on top. And spiritual awakening is a perfect tool for this compensation. You can feel superior to all those unconscious people. You can feel more evolved. You can feel like you've transcended what they're still trapped in. And this feeling, this subtle sense of spiritual superiority, it's poison. It's poison to your relationships. It's poison to your own growth, because you stop learning when you think you know. It's poison to genuine awakening, because real awakening includes the recognition that there's no one to be superior, no separate self that's more evolved than other separate selves, just consciousness recognizing itself in different forms and different stages. So this is a danger you need to watch for carefully. The danger of using your awakening to feel special, to feel better than, to separate yourself from rather than connect more deeply with the human condition you share with everyone else. Now here's the sixth danger, and this one affects your relationship with reality itself. Awakening can lead to what might be called spiritual bypassing, using your consciousness to avoid rather than engage with actual problems. You start to see that much of what people worry about doesn't really matter in the ultimate sense. You recognize the impermanence of everything. You understand that all circumstances are temporary. You develop a kind of philosophical distance from the dramas of ordinary life. And this perspective can be valuable. It can help you not get swept away by every emotional wave, not identify completely with every problem, not lose yourself in the temporary circumstances of your current situation. But it can also become an escape. You use your spiritual understanding to avoid dealing with practical problems. Your relationship is struggling, but instead of doing the difficult work of communication and compromise and genuine engagement, you tell yourself it's all impermanent anyway. It's all just ego drama. You're beyond needing relationship in the same way ordinary people do. Your finances are a mess. But instead of facing the practical reality and taking responsible action, you tell yourself money is just an illusion. Material concerns are beneath your awakened consciousness. You're too evolved to worry about such mundane things. Your health is declining, but instead of making necessary changes to diet or exercise or lifestyle, you tell yourself the body is temporary. You're not your body. These physical concerns are distractions from spiritual reality. This is spiritual bypassing, and it's dangerous. It's dangerous because you're using truth, real spiritual truth, to avoid responsibility, to escape from the demands of actual embodied existence, to feel superior to practical reality. And Adler would see this immediately as a neurotic pattern, as a way of compensating for feelings of inadequacy around actual life challenges by claiming to be beyond them spiritually. He would say that genuine maturity, genuine awakening, includes the ability to engage fully with practical reality even while recognizing its ultimate impermanence. It includes taking responsibility for your actual circumstances even while understanding their constructed nature. It includes caring for your body, your relationships, your finances, your work, not because these things are ultimately real, but because they're the medium through which you live and grow and contribute in this lifetime. So the danger is not awakening itself. The danger is using awakening as an escape from life rather than as a deeper engagement with life. The danger is mistaking detachment for transcendence, confusing not caring with enlightenment, thinking that seeing through something means you don't have to deal with it. Real awakening, mature awakening, Adlerian awakening, it includes full engagement with practical reality even while seeing its deeper truth. It includes responsibility even while recognizing freedom. It includes care even while understanding impermanence. And now let me tell you about the seventh and perhaps most important danger of awakening. The danger of nihilism, of falling into the belief that nothing matters because you've seen through everything. This is the cliff edge that many awakening people approach, and some fall off. You start to see that most of what society values is arbitrary. Success, status, achievement, these are just games people play to feel significant. You recognize that moral rules are constructed, not absolute, that right and wrong are more complex than you thought, that much of what you were taught to believe was just cultural programming. You understand that your own identity is constructed, that your story about yourself is just a story, that even your sense of existing as a separate individual might be an illusion. And if all of this is constructed, if all of it is impermanent, if none of it is ultimately real in the way you thought, then what does matter? Why do anything? Why make any effort? Why care about anything? This is the danger of nihilism, the recognition of meaninglessness, and it's a real danger that many awakening people face. And here's where Adler's framework becomes crucial, where his emphasis on social interest provides an antidote to this nihilistic despair. Adler would say that meaning is not something you discover out there in some ultimate reality. Meaning is something you create through your commitment, through your choice, through your decision to contribute to something larger than yourself. Even if everything is constructed, even if nothing is ultimately real in some absolute sense, you can still choose to care. You can still choose to reduce suffering. You can still choose to contribute to the welfare of others. You can still choose to live according to values you consciously select rather than unconsciously absorb. And this choosing, this conscious creation of meaning through commitment to contribution, this is what makes awakening sustainable rather than dangerous. This is what prevents the fall into nihilistic despair. This is what allows you to see through illusions while still engaging fully with life. Because you're not engaging based on belief that it's ultimately real. You're engaging based on choice, based on values, based on commitment to making life better for beings who are suffering, whether or not that suffering is ultimately real. This is sophisticated consciousness. This is mature awakening. This is the integration of seeing through everything while still caring about everything, recognizing impermanence while still acting responsibly, understanding construction while still building consciously. And achieving this integration, this is the work that makes awakening less dangerous. Not safe, never completely safe, but less likely to destroy your life, less likely to leave you isolated and dysfunctional and lost. Let me show you what this mature awakening looks like, because I want you to have a vision of what you're working toward, what's possible on the other side of these dangers. You can see through social performances, but you can still engage with compassion, recognizing that everyone is doing their best with their current level of consciousness. You can recognize the constructed nature of meaning, but you can still act according to consciously chosen values, creating meaning through commitment rather than waiting to discover it. You can see your own ego structures clearly, but you can still function effectively, using ego as a tool rather than being identified with it. You can recognize that most of what society values doesn't actually lead to fulfillment, but you can still participate in practical reality, earning money, maintaining relationships, taking care of your body, not because these things are ultimately real, but because they're the medium of your current existence. You can see how unconscious most people are, but you can hold that seeing with compassion rather than judgment, recognizing that consciousness develops gradually and everyone is exactly where they are in that development. You can understand impermanence deeply, but you can still care about outcomes, still work toward positive change, still feel the full range of human emotion without being destroyed by the recognition that it's all temporary. This is mature awakening. This is dangerous awakening integrated and made functional. This is consciousness that serves life rather than escaping from it. And getting here requires work. It requires what Adler called courage, the courage to see clearly without turning away, the courage to engage fully even while seeing through, the courage to care even when you recognize the ultimate meaninglessness, the courage to choose values and live them even when you know they're constructed rather than absolute. This courage is not easy. This integration is not automatic. Many people who begin awakening never complete this integration. They get stuck in one of the dangers. They become isolated and dysfunctional, unable to bridge the gap between their consciousness and ordinary life. They fall into spiritual bypassing, using awakening to escape from responsibility. They develop spiritual superiority, using consciousness as a new form of ego inflation. They collapse into nihilism, unable to find meaning after seeing through everything. But it doesn't have to be this way. The dangers are real, but they're not inevitable. With guidance, with community, with commitment to using your awakening in service rather than just for personal enlightenment, you can navigate these dangers. You can integrate your consciousness. You can become someone who sees clearly and acts responsibly, who understands impermanence and still cares deeply, who recognizes construction and still builds consciously. And this integrated awakening, this is what the world needs. Not more people who are spiritually bypassing, not more people who are isolated in their consciousness, not more people who see through everything and care about nothing, but people who can see clearly and act compassionately, who understand deeply and engage fully, who recognize illusions and still work to reduce suffering within those illusions. Look, if you've made it this far, if you've stayed with me through this exploration of the dangers of awakening, it's because you've felt these dangers yourself. You've experienced the isolation, the disorientation, the struggle to function in a world you're seeing through. You've faced the temptation of spiritual superiority, the pull of nihilism, the exhaustion of trying to bridge consciousness and action. And I want you to know that these dangers are real, but they're not reasons to go back to sleep. They're not reasons to suppress your consciousness or pretend you don't see what you see. They're just the reality of the transition, the difficulties of the path, the cost of consciousness. And that cost is worth paying. Not because awakening makes you happier necessarily, at least not in the shallow sense of happiness that most people pursue, but because it makes you more real, more authentic, more aligned with truth even when truth is uncomfortable. And because when you integrate your awakening, when you navigate these dangers successfully, when you learn to see clearly and act responsibly, You become capable of contribution at a depth that's simply not available to unconscious people. You can help in ways others can't. You can see solutions others miss. You can offer perspective that genuinely serves because it's not distorted by ego defense or unconscious pattern. This channel exists for people exactly like you. For those who are navigating the dangers of awakening and need honest guidance, not spiritual platitudes or false promises of easy enlightenment. Here we explore what awakening actually costs, what dangers it actually presents, and how to navigate those dangers without going back to sleep and without getting lost in dysfunction. Every week I create content for people who are walking this difficult path, who need to hear the truth about consciousness rather than comforting lies, who are ready to do the work of integration rather than just pursuing peak experiences or spiritual insights. So if this resonates with you, if you recognize yourself in these dangers and want guidance on navigating them, subscribe to the channel. Not for more spiritual bypassing, not for confirmation of superiority, but for honest exploration of what it takes to awaken without losing yourself. Like this video if it helped you see the costs of consciousness clearly, if it validated your struggle, if it reminded you that the difficulties you're facing are not signs of failure but signs that you're actually on a real path rather than an imaginary one. And hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next reflection, because we're going to continue exploring how to integrate awakening, how to use consciousness in service rather than escape, how to navigate the dangers without falling into the traps. I'll see you in the next video. And in the meantime, be patient with yourself. The dangers are real, but you can navigate them. The cost is high, but it's worth paying. The path is difficult, but you're not walking it alone. And remember what Adler knew. The goal is not just to wake up. The goal is to wake up and then figure out how to live consciously, responsibly, compassionately in a world that mostly operates unconsciously. That's the real work. That's the integration. That's what transforms dangerous awakening into genuine wisdom that serves not just yourself but everyone whose life you touch.